Hello again. I'm Braddock Supervisor John Cook. Welcome back to Braddock Neighborhood News, the program I am using to provide you with information on issues facing our community and ideas on how we can strengthen our neighborhoods. This month, as we celebrate Earth Day, we turn our attention to the environment and what we can do to preserve our surroundings for future generations. Today I'm pleased to have with me Jen Cole, the Executive Director of Clean Fairfax, and Ted Welch, Board Member at Large from Friends of Accotink Creek, to share with us what they are doing to help our planet. Jen, Ted, thanks for coming on the show. It's great having you here.
Thank you for having us.
Jen, talk about Clean Fairfax. What is it and what do you do?
Clean Fairfax has been around since 1978, originally as a committee of the Board of Supervisors, and in 1985 we became our own 501c3 nonprofit entity in the county. And what we work on is keeping Fairfax County clean, green, and sustainable. So we support neighborhood cleanups and recycling education. I'm out in the schools. We work on projects with churches and small businesses to make them more efficient and more green.
And Ted, Friends of Accotink Creek, you've gotten busy in the last couple of years, and tell us a little bit about that group.
It's a loose group of people. It's been in existence about 8 years, and I honestly don't know whether we're a nonprofit or not. I can tell you that there's less than $1,000 in any kind of bank account. And we don't normally think of ourselves either as fundraisers or as spenders. We depend totally on volunteers. But there's a core group of about 10 people. For our mailing list, we have about 40 people on the emailing list. And for cleanups, we get about 100 people regularly. But it's that core group of 10 that meets once a month and that tries to field all of the various interests that come our way and be effective at doing some of it, accomplishing some of it.
And basically, if you're a citizen who has an interest in the environment and you have an interest in getting a little outside exercise, you ought to be coming to your meetings, right?
Absolutely, and start by coming to our website, Friends of Accotink Creek. We have some very accomplished members who have constantly working to improve the website. And that's a good place to start, because you will see, if you go to the website, that we have diverse activities that we are involved in. Some of them seem like Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a mountain, because it's just going to roll back again. And other ones, we can point to some progress being made.
And Jen, Clean Fairfax is a little more formal structure-wise, and has had great staying power in what you've done in the community. And tell us a little bit about how that organization has grown over time.
Well, it started off as a litter concern group back in the 70s. And, as time has changed, as Fairfax County has gotten more involved in curbside recycling and landfill issues and neighborhood cleanups and recycling in the schools, Clean Fairfax has kept pace by making sure that we're always there at the table. We are interestingly embedded within the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, which is a great, wonderful partnership between a nonprofit and a municipal entity, a real private-public partnership. And so we augment the things that they do that are easy for us to do. It's very easy for me to be deployed out to a school or to run out to a very messy area and document it, and then turn that information back over to the necessary agencies in the county so we can get it cleaned up.
You mentioned recycling, and that's something that we all sort of know about recycling generically. I'm surprised how many things nowadays can be recycled. And it's not just your newspapers, and it's not just bottles. Even waste, construction debris, all sorts of stuff can be recycled. The industry is growing by leaps and bounds. And tell us about some of the advantages of that and what we ought to be looking at and where that's going.
Well, one of the great things about technology is that it allows us to keep growing and figuring out what we can recycle. I mean, we really can recycle anything provided that there's a market for it. Things that we don't think we can recycle, we can in some places. Things like polystyrene, which is styrofoam, is recycled in some areas. In Florida, they use those trays that are in schools, the food trays, and they melt them down with this super heaty, melty thing. I don't really know what it's called. And they're turned back into flower pots and flower boxes that are used in schools in Florida, which I think is a great recycle and reuse. I think that that's something that we've been looking at here in Fairfax County. But computers, your cell phone can be completely broken down and recycled in little bits. And as long as there's a market for it, then we can recycle it. But if there's no market, unfortunately, those things end up getting warehoused, and sometimes they end up in landfills.
And that is, I mean, it's a cost issue then, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we mean by market, is that the field has to become economically viable to work.
That is correct. One of the greatest things to recycle, if I had to say, please just recycle this one thing, it would be glass, because glass is one of those things that can be recycled back into glass with no degradation of its quality. So we can just keep making more glass out of old glass, and it would be great if we recycled more glass.
And Ted, I think you know a lot about the benefits of recycling, because if it's not recycled, all too often you're picking it up in the spring cleanup.
Oh, we're picking up stuff that should have been recycled. Right. And the worst thing that we have trouble with in the park areas are styrofoam. Among those, the styrofoams and plastic bags. But the styrofoam, as we see it, is often very small particles of it. It's a cup that has been weathered enough so that it's in small particles. And those are the particles, when they get down into the Chesapeake, are ingested by wildlife and can end up killing them. And if the particles become small enough, and there's a study underway now up on Lake Erie to look at the pervasiveness of these particles of plastic in the ecosystem. So this is only, we're looking at just the tip of an iceberg when we talk about recycling. We really need to find ways of raising public awareness to the point, A, they will demand that the suppliers put things in recyclable material, number one, and number two, they are actively involved in keeping it out of, when I say the waste stream, I'm thinking of the garbage cans, but it's what falls out of the garbage cans or is never put in that we see in our parks and on our roadsides.
Ted, you brought up a good point. A lot of times when I think many of us think of a stream cleanup, we're thinking visual. We're thinking, oh, you know, it looks kind of trashy, and isn't it nice that, you know, we're cleaning it up? But there's a real, the health issue for the environment that you mentioned, yeah. That there are some things that are not just trash, but they do cause either chemical harm down the road, or, as you're talking about the styrofoam, even the pieces, because they congregate.
Yeah, and we see this a lot. We see it both in the stream, but then as we have these 100-year deluges, which seem to occur about once every 3 weeks in this area, the stream rises over its banks which gets into a whole different topic we can talk about. And all of the trash which was in the stream and is accumulated against piles of brush and debris then fans out into the surrounding flat areas around the stream, and then secretes itself down under the bushes, under the poison ivy, under the brambles, the kudzu, whatever. The best time to do stream cleanup is before things leaf out, simply because it's visible then. Once the leaves come out, it's like cleaning up a jungle. It's the kind of thing some of the kids that are involved love it, but it's filthy, dirty work, climbing through the stuff and getting it.
And it is, the stream's natural cleanup, so to speak, is a little bit like taking a hose to your driveway. It just, when the streams rise up in the spring usually, and with our thunderstorms in the summer, it doesn't have to be in the stream. If it's anywhere close, it's going to go down river.
Yeah, Exactly, and the hose in the driveway is an apt example, because that's one of the places that some of our cleanup problems begin, with people washing their driveways off. And of course, where does it run to? Most often it runs into the nearby culvert, which runs into the local storm sewer, which runs into the nearby watershed, which is usually a tributary of the Accotink. So what we're seeing is remains of oil changes, we're seeing kitty litter, which has been dissolved, and we're seeing gypsum from drywall projects, which has been washed off the driveway and is in trace amounts, not to mention lawn chemicals and other kinds of pesticides and herbicides. So those are the things we don't see that I worry about.
And we always have to remind people that the storm sewer, that is the drainage system, does not go into the sewage system where it's cleaned. It goes directly into the streams.
That's it.
And 100% of that, and you might just have a little bit of oil on your driveway, but so does your neighbor, and so does your neighbor's neighbor, and all of that ends up in one place.
And your contractor can be finishing his paint job, and he's going and emptying his extra paint down the nearby storm sewer where it isn't too obvious. That's all going into the local streams. It's not to anybody's advantage. Which
actually does end up in our water supply. Now, Fairfax County has some of the best water in the country. You can really drink from the tap here. Yeah. It's beautiful water, but it won't stay that way if all of this stuff that goes down in storm drains end up in the reservoir.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because our reservoirs come out of our rivers and streams, and it's open water, and we do clean the water, obviously, before we drink it. But the environment as a whole, everything that we dump into something ends up someplace.
John, if we could measure it, excuse me, Jen, if we could measure it, we would be able to demonstrate, and it can be measured, I just don't happen to have a salinity meter. We could look at what happens in our local streams when we have a fast melt after the heavy use of salt on our roads this winter. It all goes into the streams. And for those microorganisms that the birds depend on, the fish depend on, part of the larger ecosystem, those little microorganisms don't really like to live in salt water. Otherwise, they'd be down in Chesapeake already. They like the fresh water.
Yeah, that's right. When our streets appear to be clean after the salt goes away, it did go someplace, didn't it? Right. But Jen, you know, that's a big part that's behind the recycling efforts of your organization, is that recognition that in the big picture, there just aren't, we're limited in the places to dump things. And we know even landfills fill up. And anytime you're just dumping generically in the environment, whether it's in a stream or someplace else, that's going to affect something else.
This year, Clean Fairfax made a resolution, 2 actually, and we asked people who support us and who look at our blog and read our website and our Facebook page to go along with us. One is use less stuff. That is a great way to cut down on litter, on waste, on stuff that's going to the landfill. Just try to use less stuff if you can. However you can do that. And the other is to remind people that there is no such thing as a way. When we throw away something, it still goes somewhere, whether it goes into the waste to energy plant, whether it goes into hazardous household waste pickup at the I-66. There's no such thing as a way. And so if we can think about that and think about using less stuff together, hopefully we'll have less stuff to pick up on the side of the road.
Yeah, when you mentioned that issue of a way, and it reminds me of that concept that we sort of intuitively understand that the Earth is limited, it's a finite place. I was thinking back, because we were talking about Earth Day and putting this program together. And the first Earth Day was when I was, I think, in kindergarten, first grade, and it was just when that picture came back from the Apollo flight of the Earth. And even though we all knew what the Earth was, but to see that first photograph of it as the marble, that really galvanized the movement that has resulted in your organization.
That is true, and not just Clean Fairfax, but the first Earth Day, which was around 1970. I hope I didn't just out you there.
It's about right now. Everyone knows.
What actually brought about the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and some other interesting pieces of environmental legislation. I think the National Wildlife Species Protection Act as well. Without that first Earth Day, I don't know where we'd be. I have seen, though, an unfortunate drop-off in interest on Earth Day. I don't know why. I don't know the reason. I wish I did. But I think that it would be great if we could embrace it again like we did in 1970.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that is a little bit being the victim of its own success, because when Earth Day started, and it really was a day, right? This is the day to celebrate the environment. And now we think about the environment in so many different ways all year long that the significance of a single day has gone away a bit. And now, of course, we've gotten into changing names. You know, Earth Day and Arbor Day, and I think we call it Spring Fest now in Fairfax. I'm not sure why. But do you think we should go back to one name, one day, and really focusing on that?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like if we promote Earth Day every day, you know, like my mother always reminds me that Mother's Day is every day. And I think if we can just work on Earth Day every day, if the things that the kids learn during Earth Week, which is usually that last week in April, which includes Arbor Day and Earth Day, if that is incorporated into their everyday curriculum, if the things that businesses do when they call up and they want to do a volunteer opportunity in the environment during Earth Week, if they did that every quarter, you know, that it wasn't just one day, that it really is part of our everyday vernacular, that we're recycling and we're picking up after ourselves and we're taking really good care of this place for our children and our grandchildren.
And of course, Ted, you guys, you sort of do that. I mean, that's part of what Friends of Accotink Creek has done and other Friends groups, is you've taken that, the general concept of Earth Day, and you've made it the mantra of the whole organization in your
Exactly. You could say, John, we celebrate soil and we celebrate water, but we're concerned about the quality of each. And what is growing in both of those near each other is so critical. If the trees are unable to stand because their roots are being washed away by a stream, which is so heavily engorged with stormwater that erosion is occurring, two things are happening. The trees are falling down into the stream, which is bad enough because that's removing shade and cover for the forest, but that washed away soil is creating silt further downstream right into the Chesapeake. That silt sits on the eelgrass and the other vegetation in the Chesapeake, which is where fish breed. The eelgrass dies, no longer providing a place for the marine life to propagate. So it's part of a larger cycle, and if we can help our children, and it's going to be through our schools, through our scouts and our church groups and so forth, to become much more familiar, much more comfortable with the fact that dirt is not dirt is not dirt. And let's celebrate the soil, and let's take a look. Well, what's in that? And the concept, when you tell high school kids that a teaspoonful of soil, good soil, has got more than 10 billion bacteria in it, and how many is 10 billion anyways? For some kids, this is an easily mastered concept, but usually they're already advanced placement and going on to college. For the normal Joe, what 10 billion is you know, maybe it's rush hour traffic on the Beltway. But we need to somehow get into the minds of children the way we did originally with seat belts and with bicycle helmets. If the children were the ones that convinced me to put my seatbelt on, my kids, this was 30 years ago. And in those days, adults did not wear bicycle helmets. Now, children do that routinely, and rarely do you see adults without helmets. That's just the person that we're taking care of there. If we're looking at the wilderness, we need, and what little of it is left, we need to be thinking, what is metaphorically going to be appropriate there to protect this? And we're not doing a very good job.
One way that we start, and just to sort of talk about processes a little bit, is we build partnerships. We do that, I think, pretty well in Fairfax. Jen, you talked about the relationship that Clean Fairfax has with DPWES, our Public Works Department. And Ted, I know the Friends groups, and I say that generically because Friends of Accotink Creek is the one I know well in my district. We have others. Royal Lake has other, Friends groups. You work with our parks,
yes,
and have a good relationship. Talk a little bit about the relationship, how you work with the Park Authority.
I would say it's a constantly expanding relationship. We are dependent upon them simply for the place that we're working in, and they are dependent upon us and people like us for the volunteer work. Just this month, we had an Eagle Scout complete the rebuilding of a kiosk in Wakefield Park. Well, it's not a big thing in one way, but for the Park Authority to find the money and the resources to rebuild every information kiosk, which is where information can get disseminated to the public, it just isn't in the budget. So there's a good symbiotic relationship there between the volunteer group, whether it's Jen's or ours and Friends of Accotink, and our colleagues and the other friends. There's even a Friends of Lake Fairfax, which is really on the Accotink, and we've had joint meetings with them because we have very much of an interest in common. But it's sort of a multifaceted thing. We've got working with scout groups, working with school groups. We do stream monitoring, which is done 4 times a year at a fixed location where we net the bugs. We let the bugs that are on the bottom of the stream flow into a net for 90 seconds. We take the net out and we spread it on a table and we look at it with magnifying glasses and pick out every single living organism that we can see, every bug that we can see, and we sort them by species. And being able to look at the distribution of those species tells us how healthy that stream is at that point, because some species, like leeches and aquatic worms, will live in anything. They can be polluted with all kinds of sewage and waste. Other ones are much more delicate, and they will only live in the cleanest water. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, but we rarely see those species when we do cleanups today. I work with 4 other streams in Fairfax County and doing stream monitoring, and I'd hate to say it, but they all do better than we do.
Yeah, and it's not just the bugs. There's a reason that we don't allow swimming in our lakes in the county, Lake Accotink, Burke Lake, because the water's not clean, because it's stormwater runoff, and it's really not habitable. Jen, I wanted to ask you about a couple programs that Clean Fairfax works on. One's called Adopt a Spot, and it's a neat name. Tell us about what it means.
Adopt a Spot is like a junior version of Adopt a Highway that VDOT sponsors. Adopt a Spot allows a family or a church or a scouting group or a school to adopt a smaller location, a corner, a bus stop, some trail. And we ask that they clean it up at least twice a year and respond, let us know how they did. We'll give a sign to them that says this spot has been adopted by the organization. And you can get all that information on our website, which is cleanfairfax.org. It doesn't cost anything but your time, which many people are already giving freely to keep their communities clean.
And of course, we want to encourage everyone to start adopting a spot, which would be their own yard and their driveway. We talked about driveways before, and then you can move on to the common areas in your community and work with your neighbors to do that, and then branch out and adopt a spot on a highway or in a park. And of course, some groups have adopted an entire watershed, like the Friends of Accotink Creek.
I think that's grandiosity
Thankfully.
on our part. And we depend on Jen's group for some of our materials. When we come to doing stream cleanups once a year, Jen's group supplies us with the bags and the gloves. And I assure you, we use both of them very productively. There are other issues here, though, that are interesting, because we can adopt these places more easily if we can get people out into them.
Right.
And I lament the fact that when I moved to Virginia with my wife 3 years ago on retirement, we moved into a community, and nobody appears, unless they have a dog to walk, nobody appears to go out and walk on the streets because there aren't any sidewalks.
That's right. And Ted, you know, that's a great thought that we're going to close up on, because we can encourage folks to get out in the parks and in the common areas, and to enjoy the pieces of nature that we have. And once they do that, they are going to be interested in working with your organizations to clean it up and keep it clean, because they're going to realize what a wonderful resource we have. So we're out of time. I want to thank Ted Welch from Friends of Accotink Creek and Jen Cole from Clean Fairfax for taking time to come and talk about what they are doing to help take care of our environment. We all need to be better stewards of our surroundings so that not just Fairfax County, but the entire planet can be a better place to live, work, and play. I hope you've enjoyed this segment of Braddock Neighborhood News. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or other needs, please contact my office at 703-425-9300 or email braddock@fairfaxcounty.gov. Tune in next month for another edition, and please remember to look for ways to volunteer. Your community needs you.